Hello, today we're going to look at composition sketches. This is aimed at GCSE art students. The idea is that you're able to understand what a composition sketch is and be able to create relevant and experimental composition sketches. I think the hardest part of a GCSE sketchbook or a GCSE project is when you've got your theme, you've looked at your artists, you've responded to your artists, you've written a statement of intent explaining what your intentions are, so what you hope to do, what you intend to do, and then you have to do it. And it's really hard because you've got a lot of freedom, and to be honest, I find this the hardest to teach as well, because it's hard to teach someone how to just be experimental, because I can't be really rigid in what I give them, because the idea is that you just freely test. Composition sketches show that you have planned where you're going to put things on the artwork, so how you're going to arrange things. It's important within GCSE that you don't just go to the obvious and, for example, do a portrait in the middle of a portrait canvas. So what I've done here to show you in my sketchbook, for example, is a range of different shapes that you could use for a canvas or a painting board or paper, whatever it is you're using. So we've got quite obvious ones: landscape, portrait. Got two together. You could do, your artwork could be two put together to create one. This is a triptych, so three pieces that create one. Again, this is as well, but in a different shape, landscape. I've tried to do as many really to give you an idea. You might already have in your head, I definitely want to do landscape because I'm doing a landscape, but still be experimental with the shape of that to start with. Make sure that you present this page really well. I think it's important that it's presented well, because I think if it isn't, people feel negative about their work. So I've just used a ruler to create these shapes on my page, and I've done a nice title, composition plans. The idea is that you're going to just sketch in really loosely, really simply, some ideas of what you think your artwork might look like. At this stage, you probably haven't taken your primary images, because the idea is that this is showing what images you will need to take or find if you're using secondary images. But you could use images just to help you sketch. So I was thinking today of doing a combination of landscape or flowers and things like that, and people, just because hopefully it's giving you an idea of some different things. So I've just got this book. I quite liked these in here, and there's some portraits in here as well, and I'm just going to use these to help me get a basic outline if you struggle with proportions. So I quite like that, for example. So to start with, I am going to start with the obvious because it's easier to start there, I think. And if, for example, for my project I was intending to do portraits and landscapes combined, I mean, it really could be anything. You could be doing graffiti style, you could be doing abstraction. Obviously that's not really relevant. What's relevant is, as long as you take what your plan is to these composition sketches, that's the most important thing. So I'm just doing this as an example. So for example, this face here, I'm not too worried about detail, because this isn't how well can you show you can draw. It's have you recorded the ideas on where you're going to where you're going to arrange things on your canvas or painting board, and how you're going to arrange it. So here I'm doing quite a close-up, but quite simple close-up, which would be a portrait. Not wanting too much about detail, some of the hair in. So this would be an example of a close-up composition. And as I said, I'm imagining that my project combines portraits and flowers, leaves, something like that. So what I would do is maybe think, oh, what have my artists done? Or, well, one of my artists, for example, has used patterns in the background of landscapes, for example. You should constantly be thinking about what have your artists done and how can you combine what they have done into your plans. So I could create a pattern maybe from this, because I quite like that. And then the idea would be, if I liked this composition and I decided that this is one I want to take forward, I would try to take my own photographs of similar leaves, and then I would actually work from them in order to create my tests and my final piece. So I'm just going to build up pattern. There's not much background on that one. So what I could say, I could annotate that, and I could use a pen, just say not enough background space. So the idea is that you're showing your teacher and the examiner that you're thinking about what you've done. Does it work or not? So you should have annotations on them as well. So I didn't like that one, really, not enough background space. So then for the next one, I'm going to try to do it a little bit smaller, so I'm able to have a little bit more background space and explore that idea of having a pattern in the background. So I've lost my pencil, here it is. Okay, so now I'm going to do it a little bit smaller in the background and give myself a lot of background to work with. So again, don't need to worry too much about the quality of the drawing, because it is about showing that you've recorded your plans on where you're going to put things on your page. The hair was here. Do I want an arm? Maybe not. Again, constantly thinking about what have you written in your statement of intent? What have you said that you intend to do? Because this should be, I suppose, a visual representation of what you've said you intend to do in your statement of intent. So now I can go back. You don't have to use these reference images. I just think it sometimes helps people with drawing. I'm going to use maybe bigger pattern style this time. Okay, really basic. And this could, for example, be in a project as if you're looking at how people are connected to nature. You could be looking at how nature can be personal places that you've been to. There's so many reasons you could be looking at this, but again, this is really an example of how to do composition sketches. So I decided to do it almost in a pattern. Again, these leaves are not how they would hopefully look on your final piece, but it gives you an idea of how to build up some tests. Okay, and then I could discuss that and annotate that. So I could as well do absolute close-up. I could do really far away. So I've got a lot of negative space. Remember, negative space is when it's the empty space left on the canvas or the paper. You have to think about, do you want a lot of space left, or do you want to cover it so there's no space? So now I could do a really small one, for example, and I'm using the same image. You really don't have to. See, the idea is that you're experimenting with what you might need to take, so I'll use a different one next time. This one in the corner is too close, but I'm not going to worry too much about that. And then I might decide to try and have another person this way. You know, so do I want one person? Do I want more than one person? Two faces looking at each other. What could that mean? What could that represent? The idea is that I've shown that in my composition sketches. And instead of having a patterned background like I have before, I could have more of a loose representation of the leaves. It's not patterned, it's not ordered, it's going to be more random, I suppose. I'm going to discuss if I like that as a plan or not. I liked the idea of these two being together. You could experiment with having, rather than having one final piece, having two that become one. I'm just going to see if there's a different portrait. But the most basic would be if you did a portrait in the middle of a canvas or a painting board. Be the most basic idea. But there might be a reason why you want to do that. You might be looking at traditional portraits. You might be looking at how to make the traditional style of portraits contemporary by having a traditional composition with the face in the middle, neck, shoulders a little bit, really traditional. But then, for example, if we're looking at nature, you might be looking at how you could turn this into nature and combining the tree as part of the hair. it's just showing that you've thought of different ways to show your idea, and that's become part of. So a little bit of a contemporary twist on a portrait. What could I do with this one? Maybe I now want the landscape to be the dominant feature and not the portrait. So again, I'm going to just have a little look through this book, 'cause it's got a lot of different drawings, just because it's going to help me do a little bit more of a refined shape, so I know what I'm doing really. But so I want the landscape this time to be the dominant feature, and maybe the face will just be part of the leaf. But you need to be showing that you've had this thought process. You've thought, what should be the focal point in my artwork? What do I want the viewer to focus on first? Do I want it to be some text, some words, for example? Do I want it to be a specific colour, a specific shape? Do I want the background actually to dominate rather than the foreground? So that, obviously, the leaves are going to dominate, but I could have people in the background if I wanted to look at how I could. Little stickmen. Stickmen's fine, because I'm just showing how I'm thinking about how I would arrange my artwork. And then I would go on to take pictures of people, take pictures of leaves, and then I would create an artwork from those pictures, but in this composition. Okay, so next one. I really like negative space, so maybe I will look at experimenting with that tree, the idea of the tree coming up the side. I liked this one because it was quite long, having those tree branches spread out, for example. And then you would need to go on and take some pictures of trees to then work from properly. Again, these are just really, really simple plans of what you might do. And I might turn a face into part of the tree, for example. Again, I'm trying to be experimental. Hopefully by this stage, when you're thinking about composition, you might turn almost a silhouette of a face into part of the tree. You might just leave that blank. Maybe I want negative space. But the idea at this stage is that you do know roughly what you're doing with your project, at least at the first stages of the project, or at least what you might want to experiment. The idea is always what you might want to do. If you do something here and you really don't like it, you explain why you don't like it and you move on. That's an important part of composition sketches. Okay, so I liked the idea of these two being together, being one. So what you could do is have the tree or the leaf actually going up into two. Sometimes it's nice to split an artwork up into two or three or four, there's no rules. So I've got the tree going over, and then I could have, maybe I wanted it to be more of a close-up of an eye. Maybe that would symbolise whatever I'm trying to say in my artwork. It's important to think, what are you trying to say? What mood do you want? Do you want the person... If I wanted the person to look lonely, for example, if that was important to the mood that I wanted to create, then I might think about having them small and in the distance. If I wanted to make them look lost, what could you do? If you wanted to make them look really busy, if it was really, really confident, you'd have them filling up most of the space. But I could have someone else then looking on here, for example, couldn't I? You know, who are these two people? Experimenting with the idea of combining parts of landscapes and portraiture, but just an example so you get an idea of composition sketches. So a triptych is when you have three that make one. So this is an example of that here, this being the backing board and these being the three pieces that you're going to do. They could connect like this has, or you could do them as three separate pieces that work together to create one. So I'm going to have them as pieces that connect because I quite like that idea. So maybe I'll go back to the idea of the leaf, for example, so close up parts of nature. That's really important, and I'm going to do this on a really large scale. Not spoken about it yet, but scale is also really important. You should be annotating, you know, what size, you could say on here, what kind of size do you want this canvas or painting board to be? That's really important as well. Some people might have teeny tiny little ones. That would mean something. Having the leaves that dominate this space, and they go into the different spaces here. So really, really big leaves. Maybe that could turn into the part of someone. Maybe it could be an eye. Really, really big scale eye, for example. So it's kind of using the spaces I've got left here. See, really I didn't know what I was doing with that one, and now I've just got the idea of using these as eyes, the spaces that I've got left. It's important to be quite free with this, to just test. But I might say, for example, well, I don't really like this one because, I don't know, you can't really see the portrait is clear, it's not clear what it is, or you might want that. This one, it's quite different. But I think don't be afraid of doing something different like that. And again, I really like the idea of that going over the three. But you could do it as three completely separate stories, for example. That could tell a story, that could tell a story, that could tell a story. But it could be important that they're all three. So the three create one work of art, for example. So let's go back to maybe some quite more traditional portraits where they fill up, that amount of space on the canvas, but it's not going to be traditional because it's like this. So I could have the person coming through the middle, and you see part of it. The breaking up of canvases or painting boards, it's just an idea. Most people would probably do it on one board, but it might help you represent what you're trying to say, what you're trying to do, what mood you're trying to create. Again, trying to come over here. Hopefully at this stage you know what style, material you will or hope or will try to work with. Not a problem if you're going to change that, as long as you show that process in your sketchbook. Say, for example, I really wanted to use watercolour, but actually now I've decided that it doesn't work, with the idea of having quite a bold piece of work, so now I'm going to use acrylic. That's fine, but hopefully you know roughly what you might do. So I might have a face coming in here. She might be thinking about a landscape in the distance. Maybe it's memory they're thinking about. A little bench. It depends again what your project is. So quite a few people like to do themes such as life, where you look into memories and people's life. Have a path that comes down here, because it makes the work personal and meaningful, and it is important that your work is personal and meaningful. So I've got a landscape here. Maybe I could have some hills in the distance. In the sky, could have sun. This could be someone that's passed away, for example, and this is their memory, or this is where their memory lies. It's completely down to where your project is going, to what you want to represent. So these are my compositions, completely experimental, hopefully showing you what you could do. You absolutely do not have to do portraits and trees or leaves or landscapes. You could be doing, as I said, sculpture. You still need to plan how do you want that to be presented or arranged. You could be doing textile artwork. Do you want that to be hung? Do you want that to be in the middle of a blank canvas with a lot of negative space? Do you want your work to be large? Do you want it to be small? And also, what are you going to use? So for example, I could say I want to use watercolour. That's my plan. Watercolour, and then I could use oil, for example, for the face, and I could do this quite faded. That's what your sketchbook's for. Asking those questions and showing your teacher and the examiner that you are asking those questions. So you annotate it, label it, show what was going through your thought process at the time. So what don't I like? I like this, I don't like this, so too much negative space. There's no rules. If you don't like any of your composition sketches, do some more on the next page. The idea is that you would say, okay, I really like I believe these are effective because. Remember, use my annotation guide that you've got to annotate and explain why you think it's effective. The idea would then be that you would go ahead and take pictures of portraits from this perspective, and you would take pictures of trees, close-up pictures of trees further away, and you would use this composition and take it forward in your actual artwork. I hope you found that really helpful. As always, if you're not sure about this, please make sure that you email me. You can also show me your composition sketches, send them to me on email, and I can give you feedback on maybe what you could do to be a little bit more experimental. Alright, thank you. Bye.